Hey there. I wanted to make a video that goes over how my Chaos Ogdoadic Reptilian deck works and how to perform the combos that you might have seen in Decade's video, or maybe this is your first time seeing the deck. The gist of this deck is to get out the Slicer lock, which is Cosmic Slicer Zerol comboed with Alien Kid, and have protection to make sure that it stays on the field. Because essentially, if it has enough protection, it becomes a one-sided Bagooska for all special summons. So you can see in my starting hand here, it's not really a great starting hand. If anything, this is actually just barely enough to get anything going. Chaos Space is really kind of the big thing that allows us to make plays here. Going into it, I first start with Naya because I want to see if my opponent has an Ash Blossom. So since I don't have Gamma or Called by the Grave or anything in my hand that would protect my hand from making plays, I need to start with something that's not as important as Chaos Space. So because I have Naya, I start with Naya just in case I do get ashed. I don't get ashed, so I end up sending Curse to the graveyard, since that's going to almost always be the complementary Ogdoadic that I'll be sending. Then I use Chaos Space, so you get Black Dragon Collapsed Serpent in hand, you special it, banishing the driver, you get out Striker Dragon, so that you cycle through the dragons in order to get Wyverburster, just a special summon Wyverburster, banishing that. Get Chaos Space to return this to the deck and then draw. And then I use these two extra dragons to make Erratic Seal of the Heavenly Spheres. This is a very important card because we're going to be using it not in the traditional sense that you might see it in Dragon Link, where this just stays on the board and is used to return cards to the hand that the opponent plays during their turn and then summon whatever dragon that like you kind of want. But here we're going to actually be tributing it beforehand in order to bring out a Garnet in our deck that we want to bring out onto the field to help really extend our plays. The idea here is if you have Chaos Space and you're able to do the whole loop, you want to be able to make sure that when you get seals out, you have a way to tribute it. So I do this to get that in the hand. That doesn't really do much of anything. I use Ramifications to send Collapsed Serpent. This is just like a further extension. Getting Ramifications off the top is great because then I get to add Codal and Spawn to hand, which is a further extension. So then I tribute Curse, bring out Curse, Heretic Seal activates, and then I activate Curse to bring out Naya. So Naya, when special summoned, is going to search Water Lily, which we will use later. Then we turn those two into King of the Feral Imps, because typically the opening hand, if it's a really good opening hand, what it'll allow me to do is it'll allow me to get not just Naya and Curse into the graveyard, but also Nunu and Zoha. And Nunu being in the graveyard means that I can use Nunu and Naya to make King of the Feral Imps instead of having to use the Stardust Trail. We detach a material from King of the Feral Imps. Usually we search Codal, but because we drew Ramifications and that gave us both Codal and Spawn, now we're going to just search a Reptile Extender, which is going to be Tsuchinoko. Next we're going to get Codal out, and then we're going to make Halqifibrax. Halqifibrax brings out Lamia, and then the Lamia and the Curse make Baron de Fleur. That is your really, really basic bread and butter like starter. But since you have Lamia engraved, you can now use Spawn to banish Lamia to generate 2 tokens. These 2 tokens are then linked off to make Shock Trooper M-Frame, because this only needs 2 reptiles. And then you use its effect to discard Tsuchinoko, and you put 3 counters on Baron de Fleur. Then with Tsuchinoko's effect, you summon it back from the graveyard, and then you link these off to make Slicer. Slicer then searches Kid, and then you use Slicer's effect to remove 2 A counters from Baron, and then you get Kid out. Now, I still hadn't used my normal summon until I just normal summoned Alien Stealth Buster, because this is going to be part of the extension play. So you have to remember, I did all of that. I got out Baron and I got out the Slicer Lock, all without using my normal summon yet. And I still have Water Lily, and I still have an extra card in hand. So this Nibiru could be an Ash, it could be an Effect Veiler, it could even be Planet Pollutant Virus. It can be a number of things that can further disrupt your opponent or whatever. This is a pretty ideal situation. We're gonna Water Lily, sending Alert, and then we special summon back out Kodal, because we're gonna now make Borreload Savage Dragon. And then we're able to pull the Shock Trooper M-Frame, which is probably the best, easily the best target, because not only does it give it 2 counters, but 3,900 attack on Savage Dragon is definitely not too shabby either. And so that's the end of that turn. Now, having Alert in graveyard is nice, because then if you don't have any links, because there's going to be some times where you can make Borreload Savage Dragon, but you don't have any links in graveyard. But if you do have at least Baron out, you can tribute Hulk in order to bring out Alert, and then you have Hulk in the graveyard as your link to be able to make Borreload Savage Dragon. So there's a lot of instances where you'll probably end with Baron and Borreload Savage Dragon, and that's it. You won't have the Slicer Lock as well. That's still a pretty solid end board. This is just like kind of icing on the cake, if you will, even if it is kind of like the main point of the deck, but it is still pretty darn powerful. That's essentially the end board, and then we can look as this Sword Soul player tries to play through this entire thing and realize that they can't actually make any plays because their entire field just gets Bagooska'd, essentially. You can summon as much as you want, but you're not going to be able to activate anything's effects, and because everything gets forced to defense position, you can't really attack unless you use a Link monster. Like, there are some decks that'll play like a Link monster that's big enough to just beat over Alien Kid, but if they have to use their battle phase purely just to get rid of Alien Kid, and they obviously cannot kill you in that turn, then you pretty much win on the next turn anyway, because you can very easily just pop everything with Access Code Talker or a number of other different things. Like, there's a lot that you can just follow up with after the fact. So that's also another nice thing about Slicer Lock, is it gives you a free Access Code Talker essentially afterwards. This is a funny little tech that kind of happens here. My opponent uses Feather Duster to destroy this, and it actually, interestingly enough, activates Shock Trooper's effect, to where I'm able to special summon. If I had more room on my field, I would be able to special summon 3 non-link reptiles from grave, but since I only have room for 1, I choose Naya to give me another Water Lily in hand. So yeah, they tried a long one, and then try to make Yazi. Nothing ends up working, and they just eventually scoop. So here is the profile for this deck that I just showed off. Pretty much shows all the ratios. It plays 43 cards simply because without Max C it'd be 40, but I needed some pretty good going second cards in general just to make the deck a bit more consistent whether I win or lose the coin flip. Originally these were ghost spells, but Max C kind of just seems like the best going second hand trap in the game, obviously by like a wide margin, so it almost kind of seems like a no-brainer to make these Max C. 2 Nibirus, again, this helps for going second against combo decks, because there are a lot of combo decks out there and you're only going to see more of them, so this is probably one of the best going second cards in general in Master Duel, considering it is a best of 1 format. But if you're running into a lot more back row heavy decks, then something like Twin Twisters or any back row removal can be used instead of Nibiru. It just depends on like what you run into a lot of, but I run into combo decks pretty frequently to where Nibiru is almost always going to get me value if it's in my hand going second. Monster Reborn is an amazing extender when going first, just being able to like freely res anything back. Typically, I'm using Monster Reborn to bring back Hodel in order to make Savage without having to use Water Lily, which is pretty darn nice. That's it. That's the deck profile. That's the entire thing. That's how to combo with it. That's how to pretty much play it. I don't think there's too much more with it. Yeah, that's the deck. That is how it works.